Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to InsideAIR, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we look at the evolution of force protection.
The world is changing, absolutely we will change with it. There really is a need to maintain pace with what our adversaries do with technology. Global enablement will be really at the heart of what the Air Force takes on with Agile combat employment in the future.
In this episode we'll also reheat a few stories, just in case you missed them. But first, see if you can identify this noise. Find out if you're right at the end of this episode. Now, the RAF Police and RAF Regiment used to come under a single banner of force protection. They've now split to become Air Security Force and Combat and Readiness Force respectively. Air Commodore Jamie Thompson told me what has driven these changes, what we can expect to see, and how both forces will now sit under the new powerhouse that is Royal Air Force Global Enablement.
Hello, I'm Air Commodore Jamie Thompson and I'm Air Officer Global Enablement within 2 Group here at Air Command.
Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Air. Well, the last 12 months have been a particularly significant year in the force protection world. Could you just briefly sum up what has happened, where we've come from and where are we going?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. The last 12 months has seen a huge amount of change and adaptation for both the Royal Air Force, but in particular force protection and the provision of force protection in the Royal Air Force. Much of that has been driven by the contemporary operational environment we find ourselves in today. And of course, that includes the situation in Ukraine and adapting to make sure that we in the Air Force can be prepared for the threats that are provided by both our adversaries today, but also those adversaries as we go forward into the future. And as you know, technology is moving at a phenomenal pace, so we need to make sure that we are organised, equipped, and also trained to face off against those challenges, which has necessitated us to really get amongst changing things quite quickly to make sure that we're ready to go forward now and in the future.
Yeah, because if we wind back the clock a few years, certainly when I first joined the Air Force a number of years ago, and I'm sure it was the same for you, the RAF Regiment were completely separate from the Royal Air Force Police. And then a number of years ago, there was a merging, or rather a coming together. Why was that originally done?
So over time, things have adapted, and you know, thinking really far back, we also had the fire service in that mix as well. So the RAF Regiment, the RAF Police, and the fire elements all working alongside each other. And really, that was because of their unique skill sets they had, but they were complementary in some areas and some domains, particularly in security, ground defence, and then that term force protection, making sure we could look after the force and also rehabilitate the force after contact. As time moved on, those forces separated out because of the operational demand, both here in the UK but also globally. And of course, part of that was the operations in Iraq and then subsequently in Afghanistan, which required us to take a different approach to the delivery of security and ground defence, in particular under that force protection umbrella. Again, we've moved on, and over the last decade, as we closed down from operations in Afghanistan, as we refocused around where defence wants to take our armed forces, we looked again at what it was that the RAF Police and the RAF Regiment provide. And complementary to that was the wider work in air, looking at professions, so adapting those many trades into more singular professions and specialisations within that, to really get the most opportunity for both our people, but also to accomplish against quite a demanding operational cycle. And that's exactly what we've done. So the security resilience operation profession is in design and will deliver in the next couple of years. And within that, you will have those two specialisations of Royal Air Force Police and Royal Air Force Regiment that will work hand in hand and in some cases jointly, but on other occasions taking that specialisation into the unique environment in which it's designed, be that security, intelligence or policing operations for the Royal Air Force Police, or ground combat, air-land integration, or other sub-specialisations such as counter-UAS for the Royal Air Force Regiment.
Okay, that's interesting because tongue-in-cheek, some people have said the RAF Police and RAF Regiment are getting divorced. What you've just said doesn't really necessarily sound that way. What's going on? Is it just an amicable separation?
I would say not so much a divorce, continued sibling cooperation. The RAF Regiment and the RAF Police have always worked hand in hand and have had different focuses. And as I mentioned before, sometimes that's necessitated joining those forces into a singular organisation, or, we shouldn't be afraid of adapting when necessary. Now, of course, under the Security Resilience Ops profession, they will continue to work together, both headquarters for the new Air Security Force, which is principally looking at policing and security, and for the Combat and Readiness Force, which is principally looking at ground defence and force protection, are co-located at RAF Honington. That hasn't changed, so those two commanders work side by side to deliver against those functions. We will have RAF Regiment personnel integrated into the Royal Air Force Police Air Security Force wings, and of course there will be RAF Police personnel integrated into the predominantly Royal Air Force Regiment wings. So that hasn't really changed. It's just making sure that we're best placed to use their specialist skills against the threats that we face today, and we've done that with a great deal of analysis and understanding to make sure that what we set up now will endure for at least the next decade.
Okay. So just for the benefit of perhaps listeners who are wondering why we have an RAF Police and why we have an RAF Regiment, what defines those two organisations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll start with the police because there's often some confusion about, if it's just policing, why don't we have a defence police service, for example, in addition to the MOD police service? But for the Royal Air Force Police, they are configured and trained in a way that isn't just about policing duties. So, of course, we tackle crime, be that wherever it exists, or serious crimes, working into the newly established Defence Serious Crimes Unit, and the RAF Police have a role in that. But that policing element of being in the RAF Police is only one small element of their outputs. They do a huge amount of intelligence-led security operations, be that understanding how to protect our very, very sensitive material and capabilities, such as fifth-generation aircraft and the integration of those, our unique weapon systems, or indeed a myriad of other capabilities in the cyber domain. But they also take on some other duties for us as well. They work in a huge array of posts across the Strategic Command within the National Cyber Force and within other partners in government. So they have a real huge mix of outputs and capabilities which are all shaped around protecting air. From the RAF Regiment side, what is it that they provide that is unique or different to what could be provided by, for example, the British Army or the Royal Marines? Well, of course, that's kind of driven by the environments they work in and the domains. So the RAF Regiment are trained and organised and equipped to operate in what is known as the complex air-ground environment. And that's the interface where we operate our aircraft or our space platforms, or indeed some of the enabling equipment around those, to make sure that we protect at depth against any adversary that wants to operate against those facilities. But they also have separate specialisations as well. I mentioned briefly before counter-UAS. This is a real area of investment for the RAF Regiment, with the establishment of two Force Protection Wing as our counter-UAS wing.
What's UAS?
Our counter uncrewed aerial systems. So small drones, this is,
Right.
Looking at those things, and you've seen it on videos online, no doubt, and particularly in the Ukraine crisis and the war in Ukraine, where both sides are frequently using drones to drop munitions, to gather intelligence, and to operate against the other side. What we've identified in the Royal Air Force is that we need to be able to protect ourselves and defence in the air environment against those threats. So by establishing this wing of 2 regular squadrons and 1 reserve squadron, we have both the workforce and increasingly the equipment in place to deal with those threats, and they're operating globally now as we speak.
Okay, so that's given us a good picture of the roles of the RAF Police and the RAF Regiment. So the changes that have taken place, it's happened, hasn't it? D-Day has come and passed a couple of months ago. What was it like in the lead up to this? Because you must have been planning this for a number of years, and then all of a sudden the invasion of Ukraine happens. It changes everything. What happened for you?
So, it's a really good question, and this wasn't a change brought on just immediately by the war in Ukraine and Russia's aggressive behaviour invading into sovereign Ukraine territory. Of course, that played a factor. But what the Royal Air Force FP, Force Protection Centre, has been looking at for a number of years, probably since about 2014 in a focused way, is where are the threats in the future and how do we adapt Royal Air Force Force Protection and within that the Royal Air Force Police and Royal Air Force Regiment to face against them threats, and where is the organisational basis for that. So we worked hand in hand with DSTL, the Defence Science and Technology Laboratories, to work through quite a complex threat statement which looked at what the threats are today and what they're likely to be over the coming decade, what it is that we need to be equipped to face off against those threats with, and how we orientate our people to do that. And that basis, that huge doctrine pool and work on knowledge informed how we were then going to establish what is now the Air Security Force and the Combat and Readiness Force. And that detailed thinking went right down really to how our individuals operate, be that in the United Kingdom or overseas, and how we can go on that journey from where we are today with continued capability investment to progress them to be able to face those challenges. And to give you a flavour of that, just in the last year alone, we in Air Command have spent £9 million on additional intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance equipment for our troops on the ground, and also to integrate them with the right radio systems and communication systems to allow the passage of information.
So were there any last-minute changes to the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So things adapted as we established things, and we adapted that organisation. We identified that certain things didn't quite work as well as they could have done, or we needed the right skill set in a certain area or to be complementary. So we played through different scenarios, we workshopped it through, and we looked at what does it look like when we develop that concept of employment, or CONEMP as we call it, or that concept of operations, or CONOP, to deliver against the various air outputs. And we've had to make some hard choices, of course, because with limited resources you can't accomplish everything. You can only progress so far with what you have. And by doing that, by prioritising against threats, we've been able to establish what it is we need to deliver for both air, but more importantly for defence as well.
So what would you say to someone who might awkwardly suggest that you're just reinventing the wheel?
I would agree in part, absolutely. Do you know what? There are things that come along. History has a rhythm. We know this. It's a well-known statement. And realising what worked well in the past that we've adapted to face off against contemporary challenges may work well again now. And of course, we find ourselves with the resurgent Russia, where we've identified in the past some of the good practices and ways of organising and delivering combat effect that worked in the past will absolutely work well today, but they've been adapted. And the foundations of that experience, that knowledge of what we've done before, has led to us being able to evolve at a greater pace, because we've done some of those exercises and trials before. They're well stocked and well remembered, and we've just adapted them for today's environment, where we'd be able to embrace greater technology as well. We should absolutely not be afraid of changing things if we feel it hasn't worked, or the situation changes and dictates that we do have to revert to certain ways of doing working practices that we did before. The world is changing. Absolutely, we will change with it.
That's good. And just tongue-in-cheek, I bet you're glad that the name has changed as well, because you were the Royal Air Force, Force Protection Force, Force Commander. There's a lot of force in there.
Not just in the name, obviously. But, No, you're absolutely right. It was a mouthful before. It really was. And do you know what? There's what's in a name? Actually, quite a lot, really, because it's the handrail by which people recognise what you do. And force protection isn't just about the Royal Air Force Regiment and Royal Air Force Police, of course. It involves things like awesome medical operations forces such as TMW, our ability to get airfields back up and running through the great work that the support force do, and also the establishment of communications to understand our battle damage assessment and to protect our cyber domain, which is where one of my other units, 90 Signals Unit, comes in. So force protection was probably a misnomer for some of that activity that is regiment and police based. It's much, much wider than that, which is why we've transitioned to where we are today, which is global enablement.
And global enablement encompasses that whole array of forces?
It does. So as of today, I command the Air Security Force, the Combat and Readiness Force, the Support Force, 90 Signals Unit, and the Medical Operations Force.
So where are these elements based?
So the Global Enablement Organisation has a large spread of locations and a really diverse workforce, gusting around 8,000 personnel. But the force headquarters that they all fall under are regionally based. So up in the north, up in Yorkshire at RAF Leeming, we have 90 Signals Unit. Down in Suffolk is the Air Security Force and the Combat and Readiness Force based out of Royal Air Force Honington. And in the Midlands at RAF Wittering is the Support Force. The Medical Ops Force is based, co-located here with their HQ at RAF High Wycombe in Air Command, but most of their force elements sitting down at Royal Air Force Brize Norton with Tactical Medical Wing.
Now, your background, you're an engineer, is that right? And in fact, originally you were a Royal Air Force armourer.
That's right, yes. Yeah. So I started off as an armourer, as a weapons technician, working on the Harrier and on 5131 Bomb Disposal Squadron. So I had a great time prior to commissioning in the early 2000s, when I commissioned as an RAF engineering officer, specifically as a communications electronics officer, which has latterly transferred as a cyber communications specialist officer in the cyberspace profession. But I've got a varied background, and I've been lucky enough across my career to be employed on exchange with the Army, with US forces, in Defence HQ, in the Ministry of Defence, and with NATO. So with that rather broad portfolio across a number of disciplines, I had the opportunity to undertake initially the role as a FP Force Commander, and then lastly as Air Officer at Global Enablement.
Do you get a bit of ribbon in the mess from your RAF Regiment colleagues, having an engineer as their boss?
Absolutely not. One thing I've actually found has been the huge amount of integration, and of course there is always good-natured banter between different professions within the services. You'd actually expect that, but when it comes to teamwork and to getting on and moving on, that has been really, really great, and the team have been hugely supportive from both the Royal Air Force Police and the Royal Air Force Regiment, and now more latterly working with such a diverse set of professions and people in the Global Enablement Organisation. It's really, really great, and I've been lucky enough in my career to work with many of those professions, trades and services prior to this anyway. Not that I don't like a good bit of good-natured banter though. And of course I'm an armourer at heart, so far better than anyone else.
Yeah, obviously. Now, retention is something that's often on the agenda for certain professions. How do you think the changes that have been made will affect retention, and how our people will feel about their roles?
Yeah, I think one of the key things here, and certainly over the last 27 years of my career, I've seen where there have been periods of retention challenge, and where there have been periods where people are really employed at the face of what they want to be doing. And I think that's probably a truism against most professions and careers. And certainly today, where our workforce demand different rewards and different challenges against what their needs are, we've got to adapt with that. And I think we are adapting with that in as quickly as we can. But specifically, and if I look at the Royal Air Force Police and Royal Air Force Regiment, there was a period over the last 3 or 4 years where there was a growth of lower arousal tasks. What do I mean by that? The more mundane activities that all professions and trades do. Not everything is as exciting as you see in the movies. And we have to accept and understand that sometimes you simply are going to be tasks that aren't as exciting as others could be. Now, over the last 12 months, that has changed significantly, particularly for the Royal Air Force Regiment, but also for the Royal Air Force Police. On any given day, I have over 600 Royal Air Force Regiment or RAF Police personnel deployed around the world on what are quite high-intensity operations or really critical functions for the defence and the security of both air and defence establishments. So there's been a real turnaround in that. Now, I'm not going to say everything's rosy, because it absolutely isn't. There continues to be retention issues as we adapt our workforce to give them the challenges that they quite rightly seek and should have. I think we do what we can with that, and we do embrace ideas, and part of that change over the last year has been a recognition of some of those ideas to adapt. So is it all solved? Is it golden? Absolutely not. Are there more activities going on and more activities of interest for the Royal Air Force Regiment, Police and Police? Yes, absolutely.
Do you think that there's a fear on the ground that we're trying to replace people with technology?
I don't think you could ever replace people with technology, and I'm quite firm on that in my role as championing the global enablement disciplines and professions. So technology is absolutely there as an enhancement to what our people can achieve and how we adapt and how we go forward. Over the last 17, 18 years, really probably since what has been a generational shift with the introduction of the smartphone and that all-embracing Internet of Things, the use of information and data, and more latterly the fuller recognition of the cyber domain, there really is a need to maintain pace with what our adversaries do with technology. And that's not just about buying kit and equipping people, that's about fundamentally changing how we think about technology, procuring things that we know are not going to last more than 4, 5, 6 years because the pace of change is so quick. So it's about adapting with technology as quickly as we can and allowing our people to be enhanced by that. And we see that in the real-life battle lab of what is the Ukraine at the moment, with the integration of drones, with the use of novel equipments and the use of information to shape the battlefield. So we've got to maintain pace with that. So do I think technology will replace people? Absolutely not. We're not going to see Ed 209 cutting around Air Command. That is showing my age a bit, probably. And but what we might see is more technology on our people to enhance their ability to meet their outputs.
So this move to global enablement, what does this mean to UK defence? And let's take it one step further. What does it mean to NATO?
So the Air Force has always had air combat support units and air combat service support units, and they're the functions that deliver operations and enablement to allow air power and more latterly space power to get underway and be delivered at a place of our choosing, whenever and however we want to do that. And that's really crucial to understand. So we haven't really changed that. What we have done is brigaded all of those air combat support and air combat service support units under a single commander. And now, why is that important? Well, firstly, it allows us to understand the risks that we hold across the totality of that organisation, where our people are, where our capabilities are. Secondly, it allows me as the commander to make sure that we've collectively trained all of those elements, so they're used to working together, they're rapidly deployable, and they can engage together wherever they're expected to operate. And then finally, I can give to, be it the Air Force or Defence or indeed NATO through our attribution of capabilities to NATO, a really honest picture of what we can deliver, how we can deliver it and where we can deliver it. So it's really about the efficiency of command, about the totality of training, and about the recognition of what capabilities we have today and what we need going forwards.
So what does global enablement really look like when we see it?
It's a really good question, because there are two parts to this. There is, what does it look like today, and how do we take that forward to make it better in the future? Now, many people listening today, those in the service and those with a good awareness of air, will understand that when we deploy out our platforms, be that the Typhoon, the F-35, right the way through to rotary capabilities with Joint Helicopter Command, we need a number of enabling functions to make that happen. Firstly, we have the ground defence to make sure that the boundary protection and the protection in depth is available to deter any adversaries from getting close to our most vital platforms. Then we have the security inside the wire, protecting our material, our information, but also physically protecting our capabilities, a job that often falls to the Royal Air Force Police. We have our logistic and engineering support, really complex capabilities that are required for everything through to making sure our fuels and oxygens and other vital support services are provided, through to deep engineering SQEP and understanding to make sure these complex fifth generation platforms can work. And then our cyber operations, defensive RAP, and the enablement of strategic communications from units within Air, particularly 90SU. So understanding that's pretty much what it looks like today, and it's not cumbersome, but it does take a mountain to move, and we've got to maintain some agility in that. What do we do going forward? Well, it's that keyword agility, and it's agile combat employment. So where I look forward going forward is, the Global Enablement provides a really efficient command and control mechanism to fuse all of those elements together to perhaps have a lighter footprint, but with greater capability, enhanced through technology, certainly not replaced, and able to adapt to the contemporary environment. And that might mean, the way we deploy alongside the United Nations, NATO, the CJEF, which is the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force with our partners in France, or the Joint Expeditionary Force with our Scandinavian partners. We're adapting to make sure that we're as agile and lightweight and efficient as possible to do that. And that might mean multi-skilling, so the ability of my gunners, if they're not doing ground defence duties, to double up to help refuelling, or my engineers to support a cross-skilling of engineering outputs and logistical support outputs from the logistics side. So, and this is where we fuse into the professions piece as well. So the establishment of today is slightly heavier but very comprehensive. The establishment of the future will be more collectively trained, it will be more cross-skilled, and it will be more agile to operate in more diverse locations.
You mentioned earlier about the role of RAF Regiment reservists picking up counter-UAS. Well, tell us more about how the new structure will affect reservists across the board.
So for our reservists, all of this organisational change has been looked at absolutely holistically, not just for the reserve, for the regular component, but also for our civil servants and contracted support as well. For many, this organisational change won't change things like location or outputs or their command chain. Those things will remain exactly the same. Quite a bit of this is top-of-the-shop realignment to make sure that we've got a better command and control enterprise in HQ2 Group here in Air Command. Our reservists are absolutely built into that, and the counter-UAS reference is a really good one. So 609 West Riding Squadron, based out of Royal Air Force Leeming, which are co-located with, I'm part of, 2 Force Protection Wing, are absolutely integrated into the training and design of taking on counter-UAS capabilities. We've already had some of those reservists undertaking courses. They're working closely alongside partners from the Home Office, delivering for things like the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, where we integrate our reserves right at the tactical edge in all domains, and that goes right away across the board. So it's not just the Royal Air Force Regiment or Royal Air Force Police, but our reservists in the support force, squadrons like 4624 Squadron, totally integrated into that support enterprise. And then in the medical force, a huge amount of reservist capability there that is drawn in to thicken the ability of our regular force to deliver against the many defence outputs. Absolutely critical to our how we run the Global Enablement organisation.
Well, that's reassuring for our reservists across the Air Force, I'm sure. How much input from those on the ground has influenced the decisions that you've made under this restructuring?
Yeah, so when I first took on command of the FP Force, I spent about 4 months visiting every unit personally and speaking to as many of the police, gunners and staff that I could across all of those organisations to really get a feel firsthand of what their concerns were and where they saw opportunity. And that was right the way from the lowest rank right the way through up to Air Vice Marshal level. And it was really rewarding to do that, because what it gave me was real exposure to some of the constants that are obvious throughout the forces, and quite a few of those were capability driven. And I'll use an example of that. One of the things we've identified is the utility of precision fires and snipers in the air domain and the complex air-ground environments that I talked about before. The best capability paper I had on that to take that forward was from a corporal sniper section commander from one of my squadrons, 2 Squadron Royal Air Force Regiment at Bryce Norton. And that is by no means a singular example. We have absolutely dug into our SMEs at every level to bring forward the best ideas to orientate both our capabilities and our organisations, because ultimately these are the people that are going to have to deliver that capability, often in small teams in quite arduous conditions.
So what is the feeling on the ground now about this evolution? What is the feedback that you're getting?
I've had broadly positive feedback. Of course, there's always going to be concerns where we may need to test and adjust, and I kind of referred to that earlier on, where we've put things into place and they weren't quite right, and our people's lived experience helps us shape that. So, a really great example is that we've established an air security force organisation at Bryce Norton to enhance our provision of security to the Air Mobility Force. Now, some of those people are still located at Royal Air Force Honington. As we move through that transition to get them accommodation and the best possible operating space to work from in Royal Air Force Bryce Norton, as I mentioned before, not without challenge. So we do our best to make sure that those types of complexities are mitigated as much as possible. But the clear thing here is to be honest with our people, to say, look, we know we're changing it, we're evolving it, but we're not going to be able to do it overnight. Things like building new accommodation or technical office space don't just happen. So we just have to bear with it for a short while and try and make that as painless as possible.
And finally, what would you say is the future for global enablement in the Royal Air Force?
So global enablement will be really at the heart of what the Air Force takes on with Agile combat employment in the future. And what that means is that kind of phrase I used before, which is the ability for the Air Force to deliver air and space power at a time of its choosing, wherever and whenever it wants to. And that has to be achieved through having the enablement functions of global enablement at its heart. The ability to defend our locations, the ability to secure our force, the medical support, the comprehensive logistical and engineering support, and the communications and cyber wrap around all of that. It's a really great time to be in global enablement because the opportunities are really, really positive. We now just need to get after it to make sure that we are a real deterrent to our adversaries.
Sounds like a plan. Air Commodore Jamie Thompson, thank you for sharing this insight to the evolution of force protection in the Royal Air Force, and thank you for being on Inside Air.
No problem at all. And as I always say at the end of any discussion with anybody is please do get in touch if you've got any other questions. I'm really happy to take them from whoever it may be. There's no real secrets here. We've got to get after this because the environment today demands we get after it, and we can't do that on my own. Thank you very much.
With Reheat for Inside Air, I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews. A C-130J Hercules has returned to RAF Bryce Norton following over 8 years of continuous deployment on Op Shader. The role undertaken by the Hercules, transporting personnel and freight in theatre, is transitioning to the Atlas A400M. The two types of aircraft will continue to operate side by side before responsibility transfers completely later this year. Since the original version entered service in 1967, the Hercules has operated across the globe in support of UK military and humanitarian relief operations. The Chief of the Royal Norwegian Air Force, Major General Rolf Folland, has visited RAF Marham to learn more about RAF capabilities and agree next steps for closer cooperation. Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wixton spent time exchanging ideas with his counterpart on how to exploit maritime capabilities, particularly the P-8 Poseidon, which both air forces operate, while also discussing international agreements, methods of sharing intelligence and twin exchange posts to enhance understanding and integration. Meanwhile, another high-profile visit saw Finnish Air Force delegates and a senior officer from Denmark visit RAF Boomer to see the state-of-the-art system the RAF uses to respond to potential threats in or near UK airspace. 19 Squadron operate the RAF's Control and Reporting Centre and are responsible for coordinating the UK's response to a potential threat, such as an unscheduled military aircraft or an unresponsive civilian airliner. And finally to sport, where air specialist Liam Sanford has been selected to represent England at this month's FIH Hockey World Cup in India. The Air and Space Operations Specialist is part of the RAF's Elite Athlete Scheme and has represented GB, the RAF and the UK Armed Forces teams over the course of his playing career. That's Reheat on InsideAIR.
I'm AS1 Simon Ross with this episode's Name That Noise. That was the sound of a battle noise simulation. A battle noise simulator, or BATSIM, is a noise-making explosive device to simulate battlefield noises, such as artillery and explosions. They range in size from handheld firecracker-like devices to large incendiary explosives. What you heard is a simulation of mortar rounds. RAF Regiment personnel conduct battle noise simulations as part of obtaining their Battle Noise Safety Supervisor qualifications. BATSIMs are mainly used to increase the reality of modern warfare during exercises to best prepare our personnel for future deployment on operations. The RAF Regiment also prepares non-force protection specialists for operations, as well as Joint Terminal Attack Controllers, or JTACs, to the British Army and Royal Marines, and a flight size commitment to the Special Forces Support Group.
That's all for this episode of InsideAIR. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to InsideAIR, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. InsideAIR is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.